Mike Langlois started his career as a financial advisor in 1989 with Prudential of America. In his first year, he was awarded Rookie of the Year, and in his second year, he became Prudential's #1 investment advisor in Canada. Mike has consistently ranked amongst the top 10 advisors in Canada ever since. The merger of Prudential and London Life in 1996 provided Mike with the opportunity to create his own independent operation, Langlois Financial Services Incorporated. Mike is a certified health insurance specialist, and he has achieved lifetime member status at the $1 Million Roundtable. Membership in this organization represents the top 1% of life insurance and financial services professionals worldwide. Please welcome the president of Langlois Financial Services, Mike Langlois.
So everybody okay? Everybody got enough dessert and all those other good things? I noticed, Aaron, did you go around to the tables like you told me? No? So you don't want to talk about that? Okay. All right, let me just move a couple things here. It really is certainly great to have everybody here again tonight live. I mean, the pandemic threw many wrenches in their plans. We were proud to say that we were able to keep our service standards at the high level that you've been accustomed to. And we did our best to improvise some of the events. And our online seminar last year was well received, but we had a little glitches and so on, so it didn't work out as much as we wanted to. People were interested in what we were talking about, but they wanted to have more information, and there was freezing and people couldn't hear and things like that. So for that reason, we thought we would share that same presentation with you tonight because we think it is important, and the same one that we did as last year. Now, the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is, keep you up to the importance of keeping up to date with the information that you have. People change their addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, and sometimes even their names. And when we do this, we're really quick to get a hold of all our friends and say, hey, here's my new email address and so on. But sometimes we forget to contact our financial investment firms, insurance companies, and so on. And you'd be surprised at some of the things that we've run across over the years when we're doing reviews. And I wanted to share a few stories with you to show you how important this is. We had a client who had their elderly mother that was living with her, and her mother was about in the late 90s, and she passed away. And when she died, the client asked me if I could go through her papers, and we had like 2 or 3 boxes of papers that Grandma was holding on to that nobody knew what they were. And as we went through them, we found one account that was active, and it was a life insurance policy on a Jane Doe. And so when I asked her who Jane Doe was, she says, well, that's my sister, and she died 10 years ago. So now we've got a policy where the person who owns it just passed away, who never made a claim on a person who died 10 years ago. So you can imagine the kind of mess that was. And I mean, I like to think of it as very thorough, but there's a lot of people that might have thrown that away and a claim never even made because they didn't know it existed. And it ended up being over $180,000. And the insurance company, we always hear, all the insurance companies don't pay. But I can tell you, if you run into a bad insurance company, it's usually the representative. It's not the insurance company, because they're there to pay out. And they actually paid the interest on that death claim right from the date of death, so over 10 years of interest, which is a lot to be said about that company. In another case, we had a client that relocated to another country and never bothered telling us. And it took us several years to find this individual. And luckily we did find him before he passed away, because again, in that situation, had he died before we found him, there's no way his heirs would have even known there was money in Canada, and it never would have been claimed. It just never would have been filed. Now, sometimes, even when we think we've covered everything, we forget about our plans at work, pensions and group benefit plans and so on. And I have another story to share with you about that, and it's an interesting one. We have a lot of pension clients that we deal with as well, corporate companies. And what happens is we go in there once a month, and we sit in the lunchroom all day, one of the staff members, to answer any questions they have about their pensions or any personal investments, things like that. So this one individual sits down for a review, and I'm going through his pension, and he tells me that, his address is correct, this is right, that's right. And then when I went to the beneficiary, I told him the name of the beneficiary, and he got this look on his face, and he's like, oh, crap. He says, that was my ex-wife. I divorced her 25 years ago, and I've been remarried for 20 years. Please, Mike, change it right away, And I said to him, I guess it's a good thing we didn't do this review at your house, right? And he said, you're not kidding, I would have been a dead man. So obviously I could tell you all kinds of stories, but I think you get the idea of how important it is to keep your information up to date everywhere. Now, another topic I'd like to talk to you about tonight is beneficiary designations and payout options. Because, I think that many people don't realize that there's so many different types of beneficiary designations and reasons for using them. And it's not just simply, let's just sign up a beneficiary and then we don't have to look at it for 30 years. So let's talk about beneficiary designations first. Now, the first beneficiary designation is the revocable beneficiary. And this one is very simple, and you can name anybody a revocable beneficiary. It can be changed any time. It's not a problem. But if you name a child as a beneficiary, you're going to also need a trustee so that they can manage that money for that child until they reach legal age, which is usually 18. Now, in addition, we want you to know that if you name any one of these following people as a revocable beneficiary, being your parents, spouse, children, or grandchildren, those are considered preferred beneficiaries. And by naming those, it could provide you with some creditor protection. Now, the next beneficiary designation is the irrevocable beneficiary. Now, it sounds kind of the same, but it's very different. Because when you name someone as an irrevocable beneficiary, no changes can be made to the plan without permission of not just the owner of the plan, but the beneficiary. So if you choose an irrevocable beneficiary, it's very important that you make sure they have your best interest at heart, because they're going to have the same control of that account as you are. Now, that might lead you to think, well, why would I ever do that? Well, I have a few examples to show you how it would have made a difference in people's lives. Excuse me. If you have a business, you run a business, and you name an irrevocable beneficiary, it could provide you with creditor protection. And as business owners, we are more liable, potentially liable to claims. So that would be number one. Number two, maybe you're not very good with money, and you need some help with that. And I have a very sad example to share with you how bad things can get. I had this client that they own a business, husband and wife, and the husband ran the business, and the wife looked after all the financial side of things. And the business started to struggle, so she came to me and she said, Mike, we're going to have to dip into our RSPs. Market's doing bad, or the business is bad, and we need some help. So this kept going on, and it went on for maybe about a year and a half, to the point where they actually blew right through $500,000 in RSPs. It was at that time she came clean with me and told me, Mike, I hate to tell you this, I'm embarrassed. She says, my husband has forgiven me, but I spent it all at the casino. And they lost their life savings. And what they could have done is if they had named each other irrevocable beneficiary to each other, they would have both had to sign those redemptions, and it might have stopped this bleeding of their RSPs had the husband known. So very important. Another example is if you're at risk of being taken advantage of, maybe by friends or family. And I had another client, this is still ongoing, where her and her husband, he was the man looking after the investments. She had no interest in it. And he suddenly died of a heart attack. So because she didn't understand any of it, she had her son, she named her eldest son the power of attorney, and let him run the show. And the son robbed her of more than $1 million. And obviously the other siblings found out. It's torn the family apart. The court battles are still going on today. There may be jail time, all kinds of things going on. But if somebody had named an irrevocable beneficiary who was someone other than the power of attorney, this would never have happened, because in order for the power of attorney to do anything again, he would have had to get the beneficiary to sign off, and then of course they would have been asking questions. So another thing to remember about power of attorney is that it's important to understand that as a power of attorney, you're supposed to act in the best interest of the person you're working for. But the second thing is you cannot name anyone as a beneficiary other than the estate. So it plays, it's very important that you name beneficiaries. There's always backups. Now, that leads to the next, contingent beneficiary. And a contingent beneficiary is another option that you can consider. And it's a good idea to name a contingent beneficiary as a secondary beneficiary. I know it's a lot of beneficiary words, eh? I didn't want a short form and say Benny. It kind of sounded cheap. But Now, it's important to name a secondary beneficiary just in case the primary beneficiary predeceases the life insured. And this becomes very important because if at the time of death of the beneficiary, the insured or the account holder is not of sound mind or not in good health and cannot name a new beneficiary, it would automatically become the estate. And we don't want that because then it would be subject to probate. Now, I know that's a bit of a mouthful when we're talking about this. I tried to simplify this as much as I could. So let's just say that Anthony names Bella as a beneficiary. And Bella dies before Anthony. But Anthony, because of health issues, is unable to name a new beneficiary. In this case, that beneficiary is automatically going to be moved to the estate and subject to probate. Now, in the case of multiple beneficiaries, there's more issues. Because let's just say Greg names his sister Marcia, Jan, and Cindy as his beneficiaries. But Jan dies, and Greg, because of health conditions, cannot name another beneficiary. What happens if Jan dies? Does Jan's share go to her husband or to her children? Or does it go to the two remaining siblings, Marcia and Cindy, or the estate? So you can see why it's so important to have backup plans all the way along. So even if the owner of the plan, I've said this earlier, but I'll repeat it again, even if the owner of the plan has named the POA, the power of attorney cannot name a beneficiary other than the estate. And anybody who's had to go through probate or anything like that knows how important it is to have a named beneficiary. It can be quite costly. The beneficiaries should always be named to avoid probate and to ensure that upon death, the assets are directed to the people you choose. And the one exception is the tax-free savings account, because you have two options. First one is you can name a beneficiary. And the beneficiary can be anybody other than the spouse. Then there's the successor holder option. This option should always be used when it's left to a spouse, because the spouse would then inherit the account and be able to leave the money in the TFSA without affecting their own TFSA contribution limit. And if the spouse is the named beneficiary, instead of that, she could lose the ability to keep those funds that were inherited in their TFSA. So that covers the TFSA, or the beneficiaries for the most part. And I'd just like to touch a little bit on the payout options. You know, most people assume that death claims are paid out in lump sum, and they can be. But they can also be paid into investment accounts that you already have. They can be paid out in installments, and that sometimes is used when maybe the account holder is concerned about the heir's ability to manage money. And it can also be used in conjunction. You could do like a 10-year or 20-year payment plan for the beneficiary, or you can use a combination of the both. You can use some of those dates, and you can use a lump sum as well, a little bit of both. So, you know, we could spend hours here talking about beneficiaries, payout options, wills and estates, and so on. But the bottom line is this: whenever possible, make a suitable beneficiary for all your accounts and make sure the accounts void probate, and that the assets go to the heirs they're intended for, and that privacy is maintained. And we always suggest, as you know, meeting regularly with your advisor annually to review all your accounts, pensions included. A full review is going to help make everything stay in good order, including beneficiaries and contact information.